Okay, so here we are at lesson 1, create and test a DHCP scope. Remember, this is a walkthrough, so I'll be reading along as well as doing the lab with you. The Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, DHCP, is a protocol in the TCP IP suite that allows a server to automatically assign TCP IP settings to a client computer. This simplifies the administrative overhead since an administrator only needs to create the pools and assign options in one location. Once properly configured, very few changes ever need to be made to the DHCP server. Lesson 1.1, create a DHCP scope. Number 1, use the instructions provided in the lab section to log into Windows 2K8R2 Internal 1 machine if you are not already logged in. 2. The DHCP role has already been added to this server. Now it must be configured. To access the DHCP configuration console, click Start and point to the administrative tools and select DHCP. So we're going to get rid of this screen because it's kind of in the way. We're going to hit Start, and then we're going to go down to administrative tools over here to the right, and then this will give us a huge listing of things, but closer to the top you're going to see DHCP. Click here, and let's check what section 3 has to tell us. Now we're going to click the plus button next to the server name to expand the tree. Now, you're going to notice the DHCP can be used for both IPv and IPv6 addressing. Click on the IPv4 in the tree. So here's the plus button. We're going to expand this a little. Here's the plus button. And here's the IPv4. Here's a section that it was telling me to read. Add a scope. A scope is a range of IP addresses assigned to computers requesting a dynamic IP address. You must create and configure a scope before dynamic IP addresses can be assigned. To add a new scope, on the action menu, click New Scope. And then for more information about setting up a DHCP server, see Online Help. Back at the instructions, it did tell us, notice the information. Then on number 4, following the instructions on the screen, click the Action menu and click New Scope. So over here on the top, we have an Action button. Click that, and then New Scope is right below that. When the New Scope wizard appears, click Next on the Welcome screen to continue, and this is the Welcome screen. So we're hitting Next, and now we have Scope Name. On the Scope Name page, type Internal Network in the name and description fields, and then click Next. So on both fields, we're going to type in Internal Network, and in description, Internal Network. And let me fix that top one, as I spelled it incorrectly. INTERNAL. Then we're going to hit Next. Here we're at the IP address range. Now since we entered in the information, this page configures the range of addresses handed to clients as well as the subnet mask that needs to be associated with the address. The DHCP server compares the information from a DHCP request to its available pools to see if it can service the request. To complete the IP address range page, use the following information. So it looks like we're going to have to enter in the start IP address that's listed, the end, the link, and the subnet mask. So let's start with the first one. The first one here is 192. Now you don't have to enter that in. You can continue on and just type in the rest. 168.12, and then scoot over. And type in 150. Now, to scoot over, you can use your arrow key or just click in the extra space. The reason why I did that is because each of these fields are expecting you to type in 3 numbers, and since 12 is only 2 numbers, I moved the cursor over to the next field. Now we're going to enter in the ending IP address, which is 192.168.12. And then move the cursor over 199. And as you notice, Now the length and the subnet mask are no longer empty. They actually populated themselves automatically, which match up with the settings that we needed to set for them. Now we're going to click Next. Here we are at the Add Exclusions and Delay screen, which we continue on to number 8. Read the description provided on the Add Exclusions and Delay page. An example of addresses that could be excluded in a range could be those used for network printers. For this example, exclude the IP address range 192.168.12.151 through 192.168.12.155. Once the IP addresses have been entered, click the Add button to add them to the list. Multiple ranges or even single IP addresses can be excluded within the same scope. After that, then click Next. So our starting number is 192.168.12.151. 1, 2, and then we move over 151. Now we're going to enter in our ending IP address, which is 192.168.12. Move over to the next field, 155. And then we click Add, and you see it's listed here at the bottom of the range. We don't need to add anything for the subnet delay, and then we click Next. Scrolling down to number 9, it says leave the subnet delay as default and click Next to continue. Number 10, the default lease duration for a Windows-based DHCP server is 8 days for networks that change infrequently, such as most wired networks, or networks not at risk of running out of addresses. Longer DHCP leases reduce the amount of DHCP traffic propagating throughout the network. For networks that change very frequently, such as a guest wireless network, shorter DHCP leases return IP addresses back to the available pool more quickly so they can be assigned to new clients. For example, leave the default setting and click Next to continue. So the default setting is highlighted here, but if I click in that, you can see it better. It's 8 days, as suggested. We're going to hit Next and move on to Step 11. Step 11 says, read the description of the Configure DHCP option page. There are 2 types of DHCP options in Windows, Scope options and Server options. As their name describes, Scope options apply only to the particular scope they are configured with, while Server options apply to all DHCP scopes. If an option is set in both places, scope options take precedence over server options. For example, the router option, referring to the default gateway, is typically set as a scope option since the default gateway is only valid for that network, while the DNS server option is typically set as a server option since all computers on all networks typically use the same DNS server. To configure scope options now, leave the default, yes, I want to configure these options now, and click Next to continue. Now we are here at the router default gateway, which continues on number 12. On the router default gateway page, type in the IP address 192.168.12.1 and click the Add button. Once the address has been added, click Next. And this one is a simple task, so all we type in is 192.168.12, move over the field 1, and select Add, and then hit Next. Here we are at the domain name and DNS server. So on the domain name and DNS servers page, click the address listed under the IP address heading and click Remove. While it's not incorrect to configure these options now, for the purpose of this lab, these settings will be configured as server options later. So We're going to select this and remove it for lab purposes and hit next. Step 14, click next to continue past the Win server page, which we are at, and we will hit next since there are no settings that we need to place here. Now on the active scope page, select the option No, I will activate this scope later. Once a scope is active, it will service DHCP requests from clients. However, since more settings need to be configured, first, this DHCP server is not ready to service requests. Allowing the server to service requests before all settings have been properly configured may result in IP configuration errors that do not allow the client to properly communicate on the network. Once the selection is made, click Next. So in this one, we actually have to select No, I will activate the scope layer, and then hit Next. And we are at the end of the screen. So step 16, click Finish to complete the new scope wizard. The new scope will appear in the center pane with a red down arrow indicating the scope is not active, and the status column also appears as inactive. So we're going to click Finish, and I'm going to expand this so that you can see this a little better. And here is the small red down arrow that it was showing you earlier to show that it's inactive. For now, let's go ahead and continue this on into part 2.